The morning of July 20th, 1942, dawned humid and oppressive in the South Pacific. On the island of Espiritu Santo, something impossible was happening. Where virgin jungle had stood just 20 days earlier, American bulldozers were putting the final touches on a 6,000-foot airstrip. The 3rd Construction Battalion Detachment of the U.S. Navy Seabees had accomplished with 6 tractors, 2 scrapers, and 387 men what Japanese military doctrine stated would require months and thousands of labourers. There is no surviving Japanese diary entry from an observer of this particular feat, though Japanese intelligence would soon learn of it. What we do know from captured intelligence documents and post-war interrogations is that Japanese military planners had catastrophically underestimated American construction capabilities. Their pre-war assessments, preserved in translated ATIS documents, reveal they expected American forces would require 12 or more months to mount offensive operations after securing territory. The reality would shatter these assumptions. The story of Japanese encounters with Seabee construction capabilities is not told through eloquent diary entries or detailed personal memoirs. Most of these were destroyed. Instead, it emerges through the convergence of American construction records, Japanese strategic decisions that reveal their growing awareness of this capability, and the limited Japanese sources that survived the war's end. It is a story best told through facts, statistics, and the undeniable strategic impacts that forced Japanese commanders to confront a truth more devastating than any single military defeat. They were facing an enemy whose industrial and engineering capabilities exceeded their own by a magnitude they had never imagined possible. The Japanese first encountered American construction capabilities at scale during the Guadalcanal campaign, though they would not immediately comprehend its full significance. When American Marines landed on August 7, 1942, they captured a nearly complete Japanese airfield at Lunga Point. The Japanese had employed 2,774 workers, 1,379 Japanese, 1,145 Koreans, and 250 local civilians, working for over a month to construct what would become Henderson Field. Within 6 days, the Americans had the airfield operational. The 6th Naval Construction Battalion, the first Seabees to see combat, arrived on September 1, 1942, with 387 men and 5 officers. What happened next would establish a pattern that would repeat across the Pacific. As documented in official Naval Construction Battalion records, these Seabees immediately began expanding and improving Henderson Field while under daily enemy bombardment. Japanese forces, operating from Rabaul, launched daily noon raids with Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers. The night of October 13th to 14th, 1942, Japanese battleships Kongo and Haruna fired over 914-inch shells at the airfield, creating 53 craters in the runway. By dawn on October 15th, the runway was operational again. The Japanese military response reveals their growing awareness of this construction capability. Admiral Yamamoto himself redirected the combined fleet's primary mission from supporting ground operations to destroying Henderson Field. The Tokyo Express high-speed destroyer runs, which could only carry limited supplies and prevented heavy equipment transport, were a direct response to Henderson Field's threat to slower transport vessels. This fundamental alteration of Japanese logistics, forced by a single rapidly constructed and maintained airfield, would contribute directly to the starvation and eventual defeat of Japanese forces on Guadalcanal. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki, who led the first major Japanese counterattack against Henderson Field, had been confident that his 917-man detachment could retake the airfield. His force was annihilated at the Battle of the Tinaru on August 21, 1942. While Ichiki's personal papers were destroyed with him, captured operational orders from his unit reveal no appreciation for American construction capabilities. The Japanese had expected to find a partially complete, lightly defended airfield. Instead, they encountered a fully operational base already hosting 31 Marine aircraft. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, commanding the Japanese 17th Army, would make 3 major attempts to recapture Henderson Field between August and November 1942. Each assault was predicated on the assumption that the airfield, once damaged, would require weeks to repair. After the October naval bombardment, the most intense of the campaign, Hyakutake's staff estimated the field would be inoperative for at least a week. The reality of its restoration within hours forced a fundamental reassessment of American capabilities that would ripple through Japanese strategic planning. As American forces pushed into the Central Pacific in 1943, the disparity in construction capabilities became increasingly apparent to Japanese defenders. The Gilbert Islands campaign provided perhaps the most shocking demonstration of American construction speed. At Tarawa, the 74th Naval Construction Battalion landed with the Marines during the November 20th to 23rd, 1943 assault. The Japanese defenders, approximately 5,000 troops from the 3rd Special Naval Landing Force and 7th Sasebo Special Naval Landing Force, had spent months fortifying Baitio Island. They had constructed a 4,500-foot airstrip using primarily manual labour, a project that had taken several months to complete. The Seabees had the battle-damaged airfield operational in 15 hours. This 15-hour timeline is not an estimate or propaganda claim. It is documented in official Naval Construction Battalion action reports. While we lack diary entries from the Japanese defenders who witnessed this feat, most died in the battle's final banzai charge. The strategic implications were immediately apparent to Japanese high command. Intelligence reports captured later in the war show Japanese staff officers calculating that American forces could now establish air superiority over any captured territory within days rather than weeks or months. The Marshall Islands operations of early 1944 reinforced this new reality. At Kwajalein, the 121st Construction Battalion transformed the captured Japanese facilities into a major aviation base, while combat operations were still ongoing. More significantly, at Eniwetok, the 110th Naval Construction Battalion converted the damaged Japanese runway into a 6,800-foot bomber strip that would support B-24 operations against the Japanese stronghold at Truk. The Japanese intelligence failure regarding American construction capabilities is documented in translated documents from the National Institute for Defense Studies archives. Pre-war Japanese estimates had calculated American merchant shipping construction at 5 million tons for 1943. The actual production was 19.2 million tons, nearly a 400% underestimate. Similarly, Japanese intelligence had estimated the US Navy would have 13,070 officers and 296,000 enlisted men by December 1943. The actual strength was 219,279 officers, 120,472 officer candidates, and 2,034,343 enlisted men, more than 7 times their estimate. But nowhere was this intelligence failure more consequential than in construction capabilities. Japanese military doctrine, preserved in captured manuals and training documents, allocated months for major airfield construction projects. The Japanese simply had no conceptual framework for understanding rapid mechanized construction. Their construction units, like the 17th Setsusei Tai captured in the Solomons, operated with basic hand tools, 900 shovels, 90 hoes, and limited rollers. They could not conceive that American aviation engineer battalions would deploy with 140-plus vehicles and 200-plus pieces of construction equipment each. The Marianas Campaign of summer 1944 brought the construction capability disparity into sharp strategic focus, as these islands would provide bases for B-29 bombers to strike the Japanese homeland. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, commanding the Japanese 43rd Division on Saipan, would witness American construction capabilities that defied everything in Japanese military experience. Saipan's Aslito airfield fell to American forces on June 18, 1944, just 3 days after the invasion began. Within 4 days, Seabees of the 3rd Battalion 20th Marines, along with the 121st and 18th Construction Battalions, had the field operational for P-47 fighters. By July, while fighting still raged in Saipan's northern mountains, the airfield was being expanded to handle B-29 Superfortress bombers. The first B-29, Joltin Josie of the 73rd Bombardment Wing, arrived on October 12, 1944. General Saito did not survive to write his memoirs. He committed suicide on July 7, 1944, as American forces closed in. But his final orders, preserved in translation, reveal his understanding of what the rapid airfield construction meant. The barbaric attack of the enemy is being continued. It is expected that the enemy will launch a general all-out attack. I will defend the sovereign's domain unto death. I will never suffer the disgrace of being captured alive. Saito understood that Saipan's airfields would place Tokyo within bomber range. What he could not have fully grasped was the scale of construction that would follow. The transformation of Saipan into a major B-29 base required moving millions of tons of coral and earth. Seabees operated their Caterpillar D7 and D8 bulldozers 20 hours per day, with 4 hours reserved for maintenance. The D8, with 148 horsepower and hydraulic controls, could accomplish the work of hundreds of manual labourers. The Japanese had nothing comparable. When the 17th Setsuse Tai construction unit was captured in the Solomons, interrogations revealed their entire equipment inventory: 5 trucks, 1 steamroller and hand tools. Japanese commanders on Saipan had calculated that fortifying their positions would take months. American Seabees built multiple operational airfields in weeks. Even more shocking to Japanese sensibilities was the American ability to build while under fire. Japanese military doctrine emphasized the warrior spirit, Yamato Damashi, over material capabilities. But at Saipan, they witnessed combat engineers who were both warriors and builders. The 121st Construction Battalion had originally been attached to the Marine Corps, and its men fought as infantry while simultaneously operating construction equipment. This dual capability, combat effectiveness combined with technical expertise, represented something outside Japanese military experience. If Saipan shocked Japanese commanders, what happened on neighbouring Tinian defied comprehension. The construction project undertaken there remains one of the largest and fastest military engineering feats in human history. Between July 1944 and May 1945, the 6th Naval Construction Brigade, comprising 15,000 Seabees, transformed Tinian into the world's largest bomber base complex. The statistics, verified through Naval Construction Battalion records, remain staggering even today. 6 8,500-foot runways were carved from jungle and coral. Northfield contained 4 parallel runways, each capable of launching B-29s for the 3,000-mile round trip to Japan. Westfield added 2 more runways. The amount of coral hauled, blasted and packed down was equivalent to filling Hoover Dam 3 times over. Japanese forces on Tinian, commanded by Colonel Kiyoshi Ogata, numbered approximately 9,000 troops. While most died in the island's defence, the speed of American construction was evident even during the battle. Seabees landed with the assault waves on July 24, 1944. By August 1st, while Japanese forces still held the island's southern portion, American engineers were already repairing and extending the former Japanese fighter strip at Northfield. The Japanese had built their original Tinian airfields over many months using forced labour from Chamorros and Koreans. A captured Japanese engineering report from Tinian, translated by ATIS, described their construction methods: manual crushing of coral, hand mixing of concrete, picks and shovels as primary tools. The report estimated that extending a runway by 1,000 feet would require 1,000 labourers working for 2 months. American Seabees extended Tinian's runways by 4,000 feet in less than 30 days. The psychological impact of this construction capability on surviving Japanese personnel can be inferred from prisoner interrogations conducted by the Office of Naval Intelligence. While these interrogations focused primarily on military intelligence rather than construction observations, several prisoners independently mentioned their amazement at American equipment. One captured Naval Construction Unit member stated simply, "We could not compete with the US Navy method that used bulldozer and power shovel versus our method that used shovel and scoop by humans." Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding the Japanese garrison on Iwo Jima, was perhaps the Japanese officer best positioned to understand American industrial capabilities. He had served as a military attaché in Washington, D.C. from 1928 to 1930 and had travelled extensively in the United States. His letters home, later published as Picture Letters from the Commander-in-Chief, provide some of the few surviving Japanese perspectives on American capabilities. On February 19, 1945, when American Marines stormed ashore at Iwo Jima, Kuribayashi commanded approximately 21,000 defenders. He had spent months preparing the island's defences, transforming it into an underground fortress. Japanese construction troops had built 11 miles of tunnels, underground command posts, and concealed artillery positions. This represented one of the most extensive Japanese construction projects of the war, accomplished over many months. The American response demonstrated a different philosophy of construction: speed over concealment, mechanical power over manual labour. The 31st and 133rd Naval Construction Battalions landed with the assault waves. The 133rd NCB, attached to the 4th Marine Division, would suffer the highest casualties in Seabee history: 40 killed, 156 wounded, and 48 evacuated for sickness out of approximately 1,100 men. Despite these casualties and constant combat, construction proceeded at a pace that would have seemed impossible to Japanese engineers. Within days of the landing, damaged Japanese airfields were being repaired. By February 26th, just 1 week after D-Day, the first American aircraft, an OY-1 artillery spotter, landed on the repaired airfield. By March 4th, while the battle still raged, the first B-29 made an emergency landing. Dynamite of the 9th Bombardment Group had been damaged over Tokyo and could not make it back to the Marianas. The rapidly repaired Iwo Jima airfield saved the aircraft and crew. Kuribayashi did not survive to record his thoughts on American construction capabilities. He died in the final Japanese assault on March 26, 1945. But his pre-invasion assessment, preserved in Japanese military archives and later translated, acknowledged American material superiority. The enemy's offensive power and equipment are superior, and it is difficult for us to match them. What he could not have anticipated was the speed of construction under fire. One documented incident illustrates the construction capability gap. Japanese forces on Mount Suribachi had spent 2 years attempting to build a road to the summit. Within 2 weeks of capturing the mountain, Seabees had bulldozed a road to the top. This story, recounted by Marine Corps historians, allegedly caused a captured Japanese officer to weep, though the specific individual cannot be verified in available records. By the battle's end on March 26th, over 2,400 B-29s would make emergency landings on Iwo Jima, saving approximately 27,000 airmen. The airfields that made these landings possible were constructed and maintained while under constant enemy fire, something Japanese military doctrine had never contemplated as possible. The battle for Okinawa, beginning April 1, 1945, would provide the final major Japanese observation of American construction capabilities. Colonel Yahara, senior operations officer of the Japanese 32nd Army, was uniquely positioned to witness and understand these capabilities. Unlike most senior Japanese officers, Yahara survived the battle and later wrote his memoirs, The Battle for Okinawa, providing one of the few detailed Japanese perspectives on American operations. Yahara had served as an exchange officer in the United States from 1933 to 1935, studying at Fort Moultrie and traveling extensively to observe American military installations. His pre-war understanding of American capabilities was more sophisticated than most Japanese officers. Even so, what he witnessed at Okinawa exceeded his expectations. The statistics of American construction at Okinawa remain staggering. Within hours of landing on April 1, 1945, American forces had captured both Kadena and Yontan airfields, prizes the Japanese had inexplicably left largely undefended. By April 3rd, Seabees of the 58th Battalion and 1901 Aviation Engineer Battalion were repairing and extending both fields. Within a week, American fighters were operating from both airfields, providing close air support to ground forces. The scale of construction that followed was unprecedented. Eventually, 95,000 Army and Navy construction personnel would work on Okinawa. Plans called for facilities to accommodate 4,000 aircraft. The 8th, 10th, 70th, and 11th Naval Construction Brigades would build not just airfields, but entire port facilities, ammunition dumps, hospitals, and supply depots, essentially constructing a major military city while the battle raged. Yahara's memoir describes his growing awareness of American construction superiority, though he focuses more on tactical and strategic matters than engineering details. He notes that American forces could establish operational bases faster than Japanese forces could mount counterattacks. His account of the April 19th Japanese counteroffensive reveals the futility of attacking American positions that were being continuously reinforced and supplied through rapidly constructed facilities. What Yahara witnessed, but perhaps could not fully articulate, was a fundamental difference in military philosophy. Japanese military thought emphasized the spiritual element, the warrior's spirit that could overcome material disadvantages. American military practice emphasized the marriage of combat power with industrial capability. Seabees were combat engineers who carried rifles and operated bulldozers with equal skill. Their organization brought civilian construction expertise directly to military operations. The Japanese had no equivalent force. Their construction units were either military engineers with limited equipment or conscripted civilian laborers with no combat capability. When the 17th Setsuseitai was captured in the Solomons, interrogations revealed they had no combat training and minimal equipment. They were purely laborers, not the warrior builders that characterized the Seabees. The full extent of the Japanese intelligence failure regarding American construction capabilities only became clear after the war. The Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted from 1945 to 1946, included extensive interrogations of Japanese military and civilian officials. These interrogations, along with captured documents translated by ATIS, reveal how fundamentally Japanese planners had misunderstood American industrial and construction capabilities. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, Chief of Staff of the Combined Fleet and later commander of the Second Air Fleet, admitted in post-war interrogations that Japanese naval planning had never contemplated the speed of American base construction. Japanese pre-war doctrine assumed that capturing an island meant gaining a defensive position that could be held for months while reinforcements arrived. The American ability to transform captured islands into offensive bases within days or weeks invalidated this entire strategic concept. The numbers tell the story of this intelligence failure. Japanese planners had estimated that building a 6,000-foot runway capable of handling heavy bombers would require 3,000 to 5,000 laborers working for 3 to 6 months. American Seabees accomplished this with 1,100 men in 20 days. This 5 to 6-fold efficiency advantage, combined with the American ability to deploy multiple construction battalions simultaneously, meant that American construction proceeded at speeds Japanese planners had never imagined possible. The equipment gap was equally dramatic. A single D8 bulldozer could move more earth in an hour than 300 manual laborers could move in a day. By 1944, American forces in the Pacific had hundreds of these machines. The Japanese had so few bulldozers that captured American equipment was prized above almost any other war materiel. The construction capability gap reflected deeper industrial and organizational differences. Japanese military construction remained rooted in traditional methods adapted from civilian practices. The use of manual labor, with picks, shovels, and human-powered transport, reflected both equipment shortages and military culture. Japanese military doctrine emphasized spiritual strength and physical endurance. Manual labor was seen not just as necessary due to equipment shortages, but as character building and spiritually meaningful. American construction, by contrast, represented the full industrialization of military engineering. The Seabees were recruited from the construction industry with years of civilian experience. They brought industrial methods directly to military operations. Time and motion studies, equipment maintenance schedules, and standardized procedures, all standard in American civilian construction, were applied to military projects. The prefabrication and standardization that characterized American construction was foreign to Japanese practice. Marston matting, Quonset huts, and standardized fuel tanks could be mass-produced in American factories and shipped as complete systems. Japanese construction relied on local materials and custom construction for each project. This difference meant American forces could build faster and more consistently across different locations. The psychological impact of witnessing American construction capabilities on Japanese forces can be traced through the limited available sources: prisoner interrogations, captured letters, though most were censored, and post-war testimony. While we lack the detailed personal accounts that would provide intimate perspectives, the broad pattern is clear: a progression from confidence through confusion to eventual despair. The initial confidence is well documented. Japanese military doctrine, rooted in the concept of Yamato Damashi, Japanese spirit, held that spiritual strength could overcome material disadvantages. The success at Pearl Harbor and the rapid early conquests had seemed to validate this belief. Japanese forces had defeated Western powers across the Pacific with inferior equipment but superior fighting spirit. The first encounters with American construction capabilities at Guadalcanal began to crack this confidence. The rapid completion of Henderson Field and its resilience under bombardment demonstrated something beyond mere material superiority. It showed organizational and industrial capabilities that Japanese forces could not match regardless of their fighting spirit. By 1943, prisoner interrogations reveal a growing awareness among Japanese forces of American technological superiority. Captured members of construction units expressed amazement at American equipment. The strategic implications of this construction superiority became increasingly apparent to Japanese field commanders. Every captured airfield became operational within days. Every island became a base for attacking the next objective. The carefully planned defensive perimeter that was supposed to exhaust American forces through lengthy sieges was being systematically bypassed through rapid base construction that enabled island hopping. By 1944, the psychological impact had reached senior command levels. The loss of Saipan, which placed Japan within B-29 range, caused the fall of the Tojo government. Military leaders understood that American construction capabilities meant that every lost island immediately became a platform for attacking Japan itself. The construction of massive B-29 bases on Tinian and Saipan proceeded faster than Japan could develop countermeasures. The final phase, despair, is evident in the late-war defensive strategies. The decision to not defend beaches at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, but instead to fight from prepared positions, reflected an understanding that American forces would establish beachheads and support facilities regardless of initial resistance. The emphasis shifted from preventing landings to inflicting maximum casualties, hoping to make the American advance so costly that they would negotiate peace. The strategic impact of American construction capabilities, particularly the Seabees, fundamentally altered the Pacific War's trajectory. This was not merely a matter of building bases faster. It was a revolution in military strategy enabled by construction technology and organization. The island-hopping strategy, which bypassed Japanese strongholds and seized less defended islands for base construction, was only possible because of rapid construction capabilities. Admiral Chester Nimitz's decision to bypass Rabaul, the major Japanese base in the southwest Pacific, was predicated on the ability to quickly build airfields on surrounding islands that could neutralize Rabaul through air power. The timeline compression was dramatic. Pre-war Japanese planning had assumed that any American offensive across the Pacific would require years of deliberate advance, with long pauses to construct supporting bases. Instead, American forces advanced from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, a distance of over 3,000 miles, in less than 3 years. Each captured island quickly became a base supporting the next advance. Meanwhile, the disconnect between what Japanese military forces witnessed in the field and what civilians were told at home represents one of the war's great information gaps. Japanese censorship, extensive even by wartime standards, systematically suppressed information about American construction and industrial capabilities. Letters home from soldiers were heavily censored. References to American equipment, construction speed, or material superiority were routinely deleted. The few surviving uncensored letters, mostly those that never reached Japan, reveal soldiers' amazement at American capabilities, but these perspectives never reached the home front. Japanese propaganda portrayed Americans as spiritually weak, dependent on material comforts, and unable to match Japanese warrior spirit. Radio Tokyo broadcasts, monitored and translated by American intelligence, consistently emphasized Japanese spiritual superiority over American materialism. The reality that American forces were both materially superior and capable of enduring harsh combat conditions was hidden from Japanese civilians. Even factual military reporting was distorted. The fall of Saipan was presented as a heroic defense against overwhelming numbers, with no mention that American forces had established operational B-29 bases while fighting continued. The rapid American advance through the Philippines was attributed to numerical superiority rather than the ability to establish supporting bases at unprecedented speed. This information gap had strategic consequences. Japanese civilian morale remained relatively high until the B-29 raids began in earnest in late 1944. Civilians could not understand how American bombers could suddenly reach Japan when the defensive perimeter was supposedly still holding. They did not know that American construction battalions had built massive airbase complexes on captured islands in a matter of months. The final accounting of American construction in the Pacific provides the context for understanding Japanese defeat. By war's end, Seabees and Army engineers had transformed the Pacific into a network of American bases that made Japan's strategic position hopeless. Total Seabee strength in World War II reached 325,000 men, with 80% serving in the Pacific. These men built 111 major airstrips and 441 piers. They constructed ammunition magazines for 2,558 facilities and warehouses covering 700 square blocks. They built housing for 1.5 million men and fuel storage for 100 million gallons. They constructed over 300 bases on as many islands. The equipment deployed was equally staggering. Over 50,000 bulldozers were produced during the war, with thousands deployed to the Pacific. The Caterpillar D7, the workhorse of Pacific construction, weighed 15,000 pounds and could generate 25,000 pounds of drawbar pull. Japanese forces had nothing comparable. The innovation of Marston matting, pierced steel planking, revolutionized airfield construction. Each mat was 10 feet long by 15 inches wide, weighed 66 pounds, and had 87 drainage holes. By 1943, American factories had produced enough Marston matting for 240 runways of 150 by 5,000 feet each. Total production reached 2 million tons, equivalent to the steel needed for 600 Liberty ships. This prefabricated runway material could transform a cleared area into an operational airfield in hours rather than days. The human efficiency statistics were perhaps most telling. At Henderson Field, Seabees maintained and repaired the runway through 140 Japanese air raids and 2 major naval bombardments. During the October 13th to 14th battleship bombardment, they filled 53 craters in the runway and had it operational by dawn. This repair speed, faster than damage could be inflicted, represented something outside Japanese military experience. Construction speed records were consistently shattered. The 20-day construction of the Espiritu Santo airstrip in July 1942 set an early benchmark. By 1943, the 47th Naval Construction Battalion completed a 3,300-foot runway on Vangunu Island in just 9 days. The 15-hour rehabilitation of Tarawa's airfield in November 1943 demonstrated that captured Japanese facilities could be made operational almost immediately. The island of Tinian alone demonstrated the scale of American construction capability. In less than a year, 15,000 Seabees had built the world's largest airbase complex. Northfield's 4 parallel 8,500-foot runways could launch 100 B-29s per day. This single base complex, built in months, could deliver more explosive power to Japan than the entire Japanese military could deploy in defense. Okinawa's transformation was even more dramatic. Plans called for facilities to support 4,000 aircraft, more than Japan's entire remaining air force. Port facilities to support the invasion fleet, ammunition dumps for the planned invasion of Japan, hospitals for expected casualties, and supply depots for millions of troops were all under construction when Japan surrendered. The 95,000 construction troops on Okinawa were building the infrastructure for the final assault on Japan. While most senior Japanese officers who witnessed American construction capabilities did not survive the war, the convergence of different types of evidence creates a compelling picture of how Japanese forces experienced and understood these capabilities. American construction records provide precise timelines and statistics. Japanese strategic decisions reveal growing awareness of construction's importance. The limited Japanese testimonies that survive offer glimpses of professional amazement and strategic despair. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara's survival and subsequent memoir make him the most important witness. His account of Okinawa describes American construction as proceeding with mechanical precision and notes that American engineers worked sometimes more than a half-mile in front of the fighting. He observed Seabee surveying teams operating in no man's land for days ahead of Marine infantry, marking future construction sites while under fire. Yahara's strategic assessment, written after the war, acknowledged that American construction capabilities had made the Japanese defensive strategy untenable. The enemy's material superiority, particularly in engineering and construction, meant that any position we evacuated would quickly become a base for further enemy advances. This recognition came too late to affect Japanese strategy, but it demonstrates that at least some Japanese officers understood the implications. Captain Rikihei Inoguchi, senior staff officer for Admiral Onishi, creator of the kamikaze program, survived the war and provided testimony about Japanese naval perspectives on American capabilities. While his focus was primarily on air operations, he noted that American ability to rapidly establish air bases had made traditional naval strategy obsolete. Every captured island immediately projected American air power further westward, compressing the defensive perimeter faster than Japanese forces could adjust. The most detailed Japanese perspective on construction capabilities comes not from military officers, but from Japanese engineers who worked on fortifications. Post-war interrogations of surviving members of Japanese construction units reveal their professional amazement at American methods. One engineer from the 17th Setsusei Tai, whose name is not recorded in available documents, reportedly stated that watching American construction was like seeing the future, machines doing in hours what would take his unit weeks with manual labor. More compelling than individual testimonies, however, are the strategic decisions that reveal Japanese understanding of American construction capabilities. The decision not to defend the beaches at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, but to fight from prepared positions, reflected an understanding that American forces would establish beachheads and support facilities regardless of initial resistance. The shift from trying to hold territory to simply inflicting casualties demonstrated recognition that American construction capabilities made territorial defense futile. The kamikaze program itself can be partially understood as a response to American construction capabilities. Traditional naval aviation required elaborate bases, maintenance facilities, and trained ground crews. As American construction battalions systematically built bases moving toward Japan, while Japanese facilities were destroyed, the material basis for conventional air operations eroded. The kamikaze attacks, requiring only one-way fuel and minimal maintenance, represented an attempt to continue air operations despite the loss of base infrastructure. Intelligence documents captured after the war reveal Japanese attempts to develop countermeasures to American construction capabilities. Plans were made for special infiltration units to sabotage construction equipment and assassinate equipment operators. Chemical weapons were considered for contaminating construction sites. None of these plans were effectively implemented, reflecting both Japanese weakness and American security measures. The final Japanese homeland defense plans, developed in 1945, showed full awareness of American construction capabilities. Plans assumed that any American landing would quickly establish massive base complexes regardless of resistance. The strategy shifted from preventing base construction to forcing American forces to build those bases over Japanese dead, hoping the casualties would lead to negotiated peace rather than unconditional surrender. By late 1944, senior Japanese military leaders had begun to fully grasp the strategic implications of American construction capabilities, though this recognition came too late to alter the war's trajectory. The fall of the Tojo government after the loss of Saipan reflected political acknowledgement that American B-29 bases would soon make Japan itself vulnerable to sustained strategic bombardment. The Japanese military's response revealed their understanding of the construction threat. The desperate defense of Iwo Jima, where Japanese forces inflicted the highest casualties on American forces of any Pacific battle, was motivated by the knowledge that its airfields would provide fighter escort for B-29s attacking Japan. Lieutenant General Kuribayashi's decision to abandon traditional banzai charges for a deliberate defensive campaign reflected understanding that the airfields would be built regardless. The only variable was the cost in American lives. Similarly, the Japanese strategy at Okinawa, to hold out as long as possible while kamikaze attacks struck American naval forces, acknowledged that the island would inevitably become a massive American base. Colonel Yahara's defensive plan explicitly accepted that American forces would establish airfields and port facilities. The goal was not to prevent construction, but to make it as costly as possible. The progression from surprise through recognition to strategic adaptation demonstrates that Japanese forces did understand and respond to American construction capabilities, even if detailed documentation of their observations did not survive. The strategic decisions themselves become a form of testimony, revealing through actions what written records do not preserve in words. The story of Japanese encounters with American Seabee construction capabilities is ultimately a story told more through statistics and strategic outcomes than through personal testimonies and emotional accounts. The destruction of Japanese military records and the limited survival of personal accounts means we lack the intimate perspectives that would fully illuminate how individual Japanese soldiers and officers experienced the shock of American construction superiority. Yet the evidence that survives, construction statistics, strategic decisions, limited testimonies, and post-war analyses, tells a compelling story of gradual recognition and strategic impact. Japanese forces witnessed something unprecedented in military history: the full industrialization of military construction, enabling strategic advances at speeds that pre-war planning had never contemplated. The 20-day construction of the Espiritu Santo airstrip, the 15-hour rehabilitation of Tarawa's airfield, the massive B-29 bases on Tinian built while battles raged nearby. These achievements represented more than engineering feats. They embodied an industrial and organizational superiority that made Japanese defeat inevitable once American forces gained a foothold in the Pacific. For Japanese military professionals who understood the implications, witnessing American construction capabilities must have been profoundly demoralizing. They were fighting not just American military forces, but American industrial civilization projected across the Pacific through bulldozers and prefabricated materials. Every Japanese defensive position, laboriously constructed over months with manual labor, could be matched or exceeded by American engineers in days or weeks. The strategic impact was undeniable. Rapid base construction enabled the island-hopping strategy that bypassed Japanese strongholds. It compressed the timeline of American advance from years to months. It brought Japan within range of strategic bombardment earlier than Japanese planners had thought possible. Most fundamentally, it demonstrated that the Pacific War was not just a contest of military forces, but of industrial systems, and in that contest, Japan could not compete. The limited Japanese testimonies that survive consistently express amazement at American equipment and construction speed. Strategic decisions reveal growing awareness of construction's importance. The desperate late-war defenses at Iwo Jima and Okinawa acknowledged that American bases would be built regardless of resistance. The kamikaze program represented an asymmetric response to material superiority that could not be matched conventionally. The story ends not with dramatic testimony about impossible American construction, but with strategic capitulation to industrial reality. Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast on August 15, 1945, spoke of a new and most cruel bomb, but also acknowledged that the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. This understated recognition encompassed many factors, but among them was surely the awareness that American forces could project industrial power across the Pacific at speeds and scales that made continued resistance futile. The Seabees' motto, "Construimus batuimus," we build, we fight, represented something new in warfare. Combat engineers who could build under fire at industrial speeds. For Japanese forces who witnessed this capability, it must have seemed like fighting the future itself. A future where spiritual strength alone could not overcome bulldozers, prefabricated materials, and industrial organization. The 6,000-foot airstrips built in 20 days were not just feats of engineering, but symbols of a new kind of warfare that Japanese military tradition had not prepared them to fight. In the end, the story of Japanese encounters with American construction capabilities is less about what was said than what was done. The strategic adaptations, the defensive adjustments, the ultimate recognition of defeat. These actions speak louder than the destroyed documents and unrecorded testimonies. They tell of a military force that gradually came to understand it was fighting not just an enemy, but an industrial system, and that against such a system, traditional military virtues alone could not prevail. The legacy of this encounter extends beyond World War II. The industrialization of military construction, demonstrated so dramatically by the Seabees in the Pacific, became a permanent feature of modern warfare. The ability to rapidly establish bases, to project logistical support across vast distances, to build faster than enemies can destroy. These capabilities, first witnessed by astonished Japanese forces in the Pacific, remain central to military strategy today. For historians, the limited documentation of Japanese perspectives on American construction capabilities represents both a frustration and a reminder. It frustrates because we lack the personal accounts that would bring emotional depth to this story. It reminds us that history is often shaped by capabilities and systems that contemporaries may not fully document because they lack the frameworks to understand their significance. The Japanese forces who witnessed Seabees building airfields at impossible speeds were witnessing a revolution in military affairs. but they may not have had the conceptual tools to fully articulate what they were seeing. The numbers, however, speak with clarity across the decades. The 111 major airstrips, the 441 piers, the bases for 1.5 million men, these achievements changed the Pacific War's trajectory. For Japanese forces who watched these bases rise from jungle and coral, who saw airfields become operational in days rather than months, who witnessed the inexorable advance of American construction across the Pacific, these numbers represented something more than statistics. They represented the future of warfare, arriving at a speed their military tradition had never imagined possible. The transformation of the Pacific through American construction capabilities stands as one of the war's most decisive yet under-documented factors. While Japanese forces could match American courage and often exceeded American tactical skill, they could not match the industrial system that turned captured islands into offensive bases at unprecedented speed. This industrial and organizational superiority, embodied in the Seabees and their remarkable construction achievements, proved as decisive as any battle in determining the Pacific War's outcome.